Subscribe to Echo Tales for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. Emma never thought love could grow quiet. Not dead, just quiet. Like a song fading in the background while the world kept spinning, leaving her standing still in the middle of a melody no one else could hear. Every night for the past 5 years, she curled into the same side of the bed, instinctively reaching for the edge of the blanket and tucking it around herself like armor. Her husband, David, always lay on the other side, body turned away, his breath steady but distant. There was a time he used to pull her close before sleep, whispering things that made her laugh, brushing her hair back like she was something to be treasured. But those memories felt like they belonged to another couple. Strangers, really. Now their bedroom was cold. Not in temperature, but in presence. There were no late-night conversations, no soft kisses goodnight, not even accidental touches. Just silence. Like a long exhale stretched out over years. She had stopped asking for affection long ago. There's only so many times a woman can reach for someone who doesn't reach back. Eventually, she learned to pull her own blanket tight and face the other way too. Then came Milo. It was her 35th birthday. A friend she hadn't seen in months showed up on her porch with a leash in one hand and hope in the other. "You've been lonely," she said with a small smile, nudging forward the golden retriever puppy with oversized paws and the kindest eyes Emma had ever seen. She hesitated. She hadn't planned on a dog. She hadn't planned on much at all, lately. But Milo looked up at her with a curious little tilt of his head, like he could already sense her sadness and wasn't afraid of it. That night, Emma sat on the floor with him while he curled into her lap, as if they'd done it 100 times before. She found herself talking, to the dog, to the silence, to herself. David had gone to bed hours earlier without a word. Not even a happy birthday. She hadn't expected him to remember. Still, the forgetting stung more than she let on. Milo, on the other hand, was listening. Not in the way humans listen to fix or respond or judge, but with the stillness of someone who simply cares. His soft fur soaked up her whispers like rain on dry soil. For the first time in a long while, Emma fell asleep with something warm against her chest. And not just warmth in body, but in spirit. It was so subtle she almost missed it. But there was a feeling growing inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. She mattered. And it wasn't grand or loud. It was small, gentle. A paw resting over her foot as she drifted off. A soft sigh beside her that reminded her she wasn't invisible. David barely acknowledged Milo the next morning. Said something like, "Didn't know we were getting a dog," before returning to his coffee and scrolling through the news. Emma didn't answer. She was too busy watching the way the sunlight danced in Milo's eyes as he followed her every step. Something had shifted. Not in her marriage. No, that had stopped shifting long ago. But inside her. A light had been lit, dim but steady. She didn't know yet what this change would bring. She didn't know that in just a few days, this 4-legged stranger would remind her of every tender thing she had been missing. Things her husband hadn't given her in half a decade. But already, Milo had done something extraordinary. He saw her. And for the first time in years, Emma felt like maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be seen. The kitchen window had become Emma's daily escape. Not physically, of course. She never left the house without a reason anymore. But every afternoon, when the light dipped just right and the wind moved through the trees with the kind of grace she used to believe in, Emma would stand there and stare out, pretending she wasn't where she was. She often found herself holding her breath and didn't even realize it until something, usually Milo, reminded her to let it go. That particular Tuesday, the world outside was painted in the dull gray of early autumn. Leaves scattered across the backyard like forgotten love. Notes: the grass was dry. The garden beds she used to care for were empty. She hadn't planted anything this year, or last, or the year before that. Her fingers rested on the edge of the sink, and her eyes glazed over. Not in sleepiness, but in that aching kind of sadness that doesn't scream. It hums, quietly, all day long. Then she felt it. A soft pressure against her leg. Milo, without a sound, had come to sit beside her. His warm body pressed gently against hers, like a living weight, asking, "Are you still here?" She looked down, startled, and a little breath escaped her lips. It was barely more than a sigh, but it carried a world inside it. Grief, longing, gratitude. She hadn't even noticed she was holding her breath until he reminded her to breathe. Emma reached down, fingers sliding through his fur, and felt tears sting her eyes. Not the kind that crash down with noise, but the kind that slip out silently, like secrets escaping. "I'm okay," she whispered to him, though she wasn't sure it was true. That's when David walked in. He was already halfway across the kitchen before she realized he was there. His eyes never left his phone. "Trash day tomorrow," he said, like a robot programmed to deliver household reminders and little else. Emma blinked, wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, and nodded. "Okay." David poured himself a glass of water and left the room, never noticing the glimmer of wetness in her eyes, never asking what she had been staring at, or why she looked like she'd just woken from a dream. But Milo stayed. His tail thumped once, slowly, as if reassuring her that someone saw her. That small moment, barely 30 seconds long, felt more intimate than anything she'd shared with her husband in years. A dog had sensed her pain, stayed beside her, and asked nothing in return. No explanations. No apologies. It made her wonder, why did this feel like love, when love was supposed to come from the man upstairs who didn't look up from his screen anymore? She bent down and held Milo, pressing her face into his soft fur. The scent of him, sunlight, grass, and something honest, wrapped around her like a blanket she hadn't known she missed. "I don't need grand gestures," she whispered. "Just someone who notices." Milo licked her cheek once, then rested his head on her knee, perfectly still. And in that quiet kitchen, with no music, no conversation, and no human arms around her, Emma felt something inside her flicker back to life, not hope, not yet. But maybe the possibility of it. She stood up, took a deep breath, and this time, she let it out fully. The days began to take on a different rhythm. Not louder, not busier, just gentler. Emma noticed it first in the small pauses, in the quiet moments between her chores. When the world felt too quiet and her thoughts too loud, there was always one steady presence by her side. Milo. She began to talk out loud more often, not in the way people mutter to themselves, but as if she were truly having a conversation. Washing dishes, she'd say, "I used to dream of living in Paris, you know." Folding laundry, she'd confess, "I thought love was supposed to grow with time, not shrink." And every time, Milo would sit beside her, alert, those warm amber eyes fixed on her like she was the only person in the world. There was something in those eyes. Not just obedience or curiosity, but something close to understanding. They didn't pity her, didn't avoid her pain. They held it, gently, patiently. She hadn't felt that in years. One evening, Emma found herself sitting on the floor of the living room, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The rain tapped lightly against the windows, and the soft hum of the fridge was the only sound in the house. David was upstairs, as always, his laughter occasionally drifting down from his headphones as he watched yet another show alone. They hadn't had dinner together in weeks, maybe months. Milo patted over and lay his head in her lap. She smiled, down at him, and began to speak, not to fill the silence, but to finally be heard. "I think I'm disappearing, Milo," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every day a little more, like fog lifting except no one's watching, and I don't think he even notices." The tears came then. Slow, but certain. They slid down her cheeks quietly, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. Emma didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, one by one, and Milo stayed right there, his tail thumping gently, his body pressed close, like he was anchoring her. He looked up at her, those soulful eyes searching her face, and she could have sworn he was asking her, "Are you okay?" It was a question David hadn't asked in. She couldn't even remember how long. Later that night, as she brushed her teeth, she glanced at the mirror and startled herself. Her reflection looked older, yes, but not just from time. It was from neglect, not by others, but by herself. She had stopped looking, stopped caring, stopped being curious about the woman staring back. But that night, she looked longer. She thought about how Milo leaned into her when she was quiet, how he watched her, like every word out of her mouth mattered. And she realized he had given her something priceless. Presence, not distraction, not routine, not passive coexistence, but real, wordless, intentional presence. Something her marriage hadn't held in a long, long time. She climbed into bed while David snored faintly, already deep in sleep. She didn't wake him. She didn't want to. Instead, she whispered, "Good night, Milo," and felt a warm nose nuzzle her hand from beside the bed. He had followed her in, curled up close to her side like he'd always belonged there. And that night, for the first time in forever, she didn't fall asleep feeling invisible. She fell asleep knowing that someone, even if only a dog, saw her. Every part of her. And somehow, that was enough. The sky cracked open with rain the moment Emma stepped off the bus. She hadn't brought an umbrella. It was supposed to be sunny all day. Just like so much in her life, the weather had shifted without warning, without care. Now she was drenched. Hair sticking to her face, coat clinging to her like a second skin, water seeping into her shoes. The storm soaked her, but it couldn't wash away what she carried inside. By the time she reached her front porch, the wind had picked up, howling like a warning. She fumbled with her keys, shoulders hunched, teeth chattering. The house was dark, inside. Quiet. Emma stepped into the stillness and waited for the familiar warmth of home to greet her. But it didn't. Just a note on the kitchen counter, scribbled in David's quick, thoughtless handwriting. "Out with the guys. Don't wait up." She stared at the paper. No, "Hope your day was okay." No, "Drive safe." No, "Miss you." Just cold ink on white paper, as empty as the marriage they were still pretending to hold together. The tears threatened to rise, again, but she held them back. Not because she was strong, but because she was tired. Tired of crying over someone who no longer even noticed she was alive. As she stood there, shivering in the kitchen, dripping onto the tile, she didn't call a friend. She didn't go upstairs. She just stood still. And then, from the hallway, came the soft rhythm of pause. Milo. He appeared with something clutched in his mouth. At first, she couldn't tell what it was, until he patted closer, tail wagging, and dropped it gently at her feet. A blanket. Emma stared, stunned. It was the one she kept folded on the couch for chilly mornings. Milo must have pulled it down himself. She bent to her knees, heart pounding, not from exhaustion, but from emotion. She hadn't asked, She hadn't even spoken. Yet somehow, he knew. He pressed himself against her as she wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like comfort, like the home she'd been trying to find within her own walls for years. A laugh broke from her lips, wet, cracked, but real. "You're not supposed to be on the furniture, you know," she whispered, brushing rain from his golden fur. Milo responded by climbing onto the rug in front of her, sitting upright like a soldier keeping watch. And in that absurd, beautiful moment, soaked and alone but not really alone, Emma felt something so tender. It almost hurt. He cared. Not in the way people say they care, full of empty words and broken promises, but in the truest, simplest way. He showed up. She sat there for a long time, Milo by her side, thunder rumbling gently above them. Every now and then, he'd glance up at her, as if checking to make sure she was still okay. His eyes didn't ask for anything. They just gave. David didn't call, didn't text, didn't even ask how her day had gone when he returned sometime past midnight. But Milo had, without words, without delay, without expectation. He had comforted her. And in that quiet, aching space, Emma realized something that both stung and soothed. Love isn't proven in grand moments. It's revealed in small ones. A blanket, a paw, a presence. In just days, Milo had offered more warmth than David had in 5 years. And Emma was starting to feel it. Saturday morning came like it always did, quiet and heavy. The kind of morning where the world felt like it was holding its breath. Emma moved through the kitchen like clockwork, her hands knowing what to do even when her heart didn't. She poured coffee for 2, out of habit more than love. David had started sleeping in on weekends, sometimes until noon. When he finally emerged, he looked like a man still lost in a dream he had no intention of waking from. This morning, though, he came down earlier, hair tousled, phone in hand, and eyes already glued to the screen. Emma offered him the coffee, her voice soft. "It's hot." He nodded without looking up, murmured a distracted, "Thanks," and walked past her to the living room. He sat on the far edge of the couch, right where he always did, and scrolled, tapped, swiped. She stood there a moment too long, coffee cooling in her hands, waiting for what? A smile? A good morning? Something. But there was nothing, and then it happened. She walked past him to grab a magazine off the table, just as he lifted his eyes from the screen. Their gazes should have met, but they didn't. David's eyes moved right through her, as if she were glass, a wall, a passing shadow. He looked at her the way people look at furniture. Something present, but not really there. She froze. There, in the middle of their living room, with her fingers still brushing the pages of a magazine she hadn't meant to read, Emma felt something inside her collapse. Quietly, silently, like a building no one bothered to save. It wasn't the worst thing David had ever done. In fact, it wasn't even anything new. But it was that one small, piercing moment, the one where you realize someone doesn't see you anymore, not truly, and it broke her in a way nothing loud ever could. She turned away before he could notice her eyes welling up. But of course he didn't. Milo, however, had been watching. From his spot near the hallway, he rose slowly, padded over, and rested his chin on Emma's knee. No bark, no sound, just a simple touch that said, "I see you." She knelt and wrapped her arms around him. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur. "Thank you for not pretending I don't exist." And then something shifted inside her. A thought bloomed, terrifying but clear. Why am I holding on to someone who already let go? Later that day, Emma took Milo for a walk. Not just the usual circle around the block. She went further, past the bakery she used to visit when she still felt like herself, past the bookstore where she once dreamed of writing a novel, past the flower shop where she had once picked out daisies for her first apartment with David, back when they still held hands. The streets hadn't changed much, but she had. With every step, Milo beside her, Emma felt herself stepping closer, to a truth she had been afraid to say out loud. She wasn't happy, and she hadn't been for a long time. That night, she didn't wait for David to ask her how her day was. She didn't expect him to. Instead, she took a warm shower, changed into her softest pajamas, and curled up on the couch with Milo. The same couch David used to pull her onto during movie nights, the one they once shared. Now, it was hers, and Milo's. She leaned her head against his, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. There was still so much she didn't know. What came next, how she'd face it, or whether she even had the courage to. But one thing had become heartbreakingly clear. In just days, her dog had done something her husband hadn't in 5 years. He saw her, and for the first time, she was starting to see herself too. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floor. Emma sat cross-legged on the rug, a warm cup of tea in her hands. Milo, curled up beside her like he always was now, a quiet guardian, a steady presence. The air smelled of cinnamon and calm. It had been a week since that walk, the long, quiet one where she had let her truth unfold, step by step. And in those 7 days, something inside her had been changing. Gently, not in a grand movie scene kind of way, but in slow, soft shifts that mattered more than any storm. She started writing again. Just little things. Sentences scribbled into an old journal, notebooks filled with her thoughts. She wrote about the silence in her house, about the ache of being unseen, about the strange healing that came from a dog who never asked for anything, but still gave her everything. David didn't notice the changes, not in the house, not in her. He came and went like usual. His footsteps didn't pause at the kitchen anymore. His words were fewer than ever. But what stung the most was that he didn't even seem cruel, just indifferent. And somehow, that was worse. But Emma had stopped hoping he'd change. What she had started doing instead was choosing herself. On Sunday morning, while David was out again, she sat down with a cup of tea and opened her laptop. Milo rested beside her, his head on her feet. She clicked through rental listings with a steady hand and a soft heart. A studio apartment near the lake. Small, but full of sunlight. It allowed pets. Her heart beat a little faster. That evening, when David returned, she didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't beg him to talk. She just sat him down and told him calmly that she was leaving. He blinked at her. "What do you mean, leaving?" "I mean I've been gone for a long time," she said, voice quiet but firm. "I'm just finally making it real." He said something about being surprised, about her being dramatic, about things not being that bad. Emma didn't respond with anger. She didn't need to. She just stood, took Milo's leash, and said, "You didn't notice when I was hurting. You only noticed when I started healing." That night, she and Milo slept on a mattress on the floor of the new apartment. The air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. There were boxes everywhere, but she felt more at home than she had in years. As she lay down beside her dog, her companion, her healer, her silent friend, Emma whispered, "Thank you." Milo let out a small sigh and nudged his head under her hand, like he knew. In just days, he had done what her husband hadn't done in 5 years. He stayed. He listened. He loved, without needing to be asked. The apartment was quiet. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with a kind of peace that only comes after breaking your own heart to put it back together. And as she drifted into sleep, with Milo curled up against her, Emma knew she had done something brave. Not loud, not dramatic, but brave. She had chosen to stop waiting for someone else to see her. She had learned to see herself and love. It didn't leave her behind. It simply found her in a different form, wrapped in fur, patience, and the quiet beat of a loyal heart.